Hope Anderson held the cleaning cloth with trembling hands, hidden behind the heavy bathroom door of St. James Parish. It was Saturday morning, and the air vibrated with anticipation for the most awaited wedding of the year. Inside, the bride, Isabel, spoke on the phone in whispers that cut the air like glass. The words that leaked through the crack froze Hope's blood. "Daniel, my love, you know I love you. This is just business. I am marrying Alexander solely for his money." Hope held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. She shouldn't be there, shouldn't be hearing this, but her feet were glued to the marble floor, turning her into a witness of a monumental betrayal. Isabel, stunning in her wedding dress, paced back and forth, the silk making a soft rustle. "As soon as I have access to his accounts and we have a child, it will be easy to get rid of the poor thing," she laughed, a cold sound that didn't match the purity of her dress. 2 years, Daniel. 2 years at most, and the entire fortune will be ours. Hope shrank, the weight of those words crushing her. The man waiting for her at the altar, a groom with a gentle face she had seen arrive earlier, was not the future husband from a fairy tale. He was the target of a cruel conspiracy, the victim of a plan woven with the thread of greed and the coldest of ambitions. The church, a sacred place, was being desecrated. It was then that their eyes met, an electric shock through the mirror's reflection. Isabel hung up the phone slowly, her sweet smile dissolving into a mask of contained fury. "How long have you been there?" she hissed. Hope stepped out from her hiding place, her legs shaky. "I was just cleaning, Mom. I didn't hear anything." "Liar," Isabel said, advancing. She opened her designer bag, took out a wad of cash. "How much do you want to keep quiet?" But Hope, moved by an integrity that money couldn't buy, refused. "I can't let you deceive that man." The bride blocked her path, her face transformed by hatred. "A cleaning lady trying to give me lessons? You have no idea who you're messing with." A terrible betrayal, an unexpected witness, and a bride who will stop at nothing. Will the truth make it to the altar in time? If you believe in the courage of those who fight for justice, subscribe to the channel and like this video to not miss this breathtaking twist. For 2 years, that church had been Hope's refuge. More than a job, cleaning its sacred halls was an act of silent devotion. She knew every echo, every stained glass window, every wooden saint. She believed in the sanctity of the vows that were made before that altar, in the promises of love and fidelity that the walls seemed to absorb. For her, the church was a place where truth and goodness should prevail. Therefore, Isabel's cold and calculated confession was not just a shocking piece of gossip, it was a profanation. It was the invasion of the cynical and materialistic world into the one place where Hope still believed purity was possible. Isabel's betrayal was not just against her fiancé, it was against the very faith Hope placed in that location. Outside the church walls, Hope's life was a constant, silent battle. In a small rented apartment, she cared for her mother, Sonia, a woman with a fragile heart, whose health depended on expensive medicines that Hope's salary could barely cover. Every cent she earned was meticulously counted, divided between rent, food, and the medications that kept her mother alive. She lived in a permanent state of exhaustion, balancing the hard work with the care of an improvised nurse. Losing that job was not an option. It would mean not only unemployment, but possibly a death sentence for the only person she had in the world. Every day was a testament to her resilience and her unconditional love. Injustice, for Hope, was not an abstract concept. She saw it every day, in her mother's difficulty getting medical care, in her neighbor's struggle to pay bills, in the way the world seemed to reward the dishonest and punish the good. Her mother, however, had raised her with an unshakable moral compass, teaching her that dignity was the only wealth no one could ever steal from her. That's why, when Isabel tried to buy her silence, the gesture was more than an insult. It was a direct attack on the foundation of her identity. The fear of losing her job was real and paralyzing, but the fear of betraying her own principles, of becoming an accomplice to cruelty, was even greater. The adrenaline of justice overcame the fear. Hope pushed past Isabel and ran, a blue blur of desperation against the white and gold of the church nave. The guests turned, their heads adorned with expensive hats and jewels, shocked by the breach of protocol. The whispers turned into a buzz of disapproval. She saw her target at the altar, Alexander, standing and smiling, a good and innocent man about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Without caring about the consequences, she shouted, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling and silencing the organ music. "Mr. DeWitt, don't get married. It's a sham. She's deceiving you." The cry was an act of courage, a bomb of truth thrown into the middle of a theater of lies. Before Alexander could react, Isabel appeared at the back of the church, a vision of a bride in distress. Tears, perfectly placed, streamed down her face, and her voice was a victim's lament. "My love, forgive me," she cried, running towards the altar. "This woman has gone insane. She's jealous." Upon arriving, she clung to Alexander, using her body as a shield. "She threatened me, said she would destroy our wedding because I'm rich, and she's just a housekeeper." The performance was masterful. In seconds, she rewrote the narrative, turning Hope's warning into the ramblings of an unhinged and envious woman, a story that the elite audience was all too willing to believe. Alexander was paralyzed, caught between two impossible realities. On one side, the woman he loved, fragile and crying in his arms, a princess from his own world. On the other, a housekeeper, disheveled, breathless, with the eyes of someone who's seen a ghost, shouting surreal accusations. In that court of appearances, the verdict seemed obvious. Who would believe the word of a housekeeper against that of one of society's most respected heiresses? The social logic, the pressure of 300 pairs of eyes judging him, all weighed on him. And then, with a cold voice that sealed Hope's fate, he made his choice. "Security," he ordered. "Please, remove this woman from here." Two men grabbed Hope's arms. She struggled, her eyes still fixed on Alexander, in a last desperate attempt to make him see the truth. "Please don't do this. She will destroy you," she cried, as she was dragged down the marble aisle. The guests looked at her with a mixture of pity and contempt. Isabel, nestled in Alexander's chest, whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Thank you for protecting me, my love." The heavy wooden doors of the church closed with a dull thud, locking Hope outside, in the real world. Inside, the wedding march resumed, a triumphant hymn for the lie that had just won. From the altar, Alexander felt as if the ceremony was proceeding in a separate world, a dream from which he had been awakened. He held Isabel's hand, his supposedly traumatized bride, but he noticed something strange. As soon as Hope was removed, her sobs ceased with a disconcerting speed. Her eyes, which moments ago were shedding tears of panic, were now dry, shining with a gleam that was not of relief, but of a cold triumph. He tried to tell himself it was the shock, the adrenaline. But as the priest finished the ceremony, an uncomfortable question began to form in his mind. Was the desperate sincerity in the housekeeper's eyes truly the madness of an envious woman, or the warning of a witness to the truth? During the reception, as guests congratulated him on his firmness and cursed the crazy woman who tried to ruin his day, Alexander's mind was at work, replaying every detail. Hope's accusation had been too specific. A name, Daniel. A plan to take his money. Why would a disturbed woman invent such concrete details? He watched Isabel, now the perfect hostess, laughing, socializing, completely at ease. The woman who should have been shaken after such a traumatic attack seemed perfectly serene, almost relieved. The dissonance between the trauma she claimed and the calm she displayed was a silent alarm that rang louder and louder in his head. The seed of doubt, once planted, began to take root. He overheard Isabel talking with a friend, laughing about the incident as if it were an amusing anecdote. "Thank goodness we got rid of that drama, right?" she said. There was no fear in her voice, no shadow of trauma. There was only the satisfaction of someone who had won a battle. In that moment, Alexander felt a chill. He had made a public choice based on logic and appearances, the word of his rich and respected fiancée against that of a humble, desperate employee. But his intuition, a voice he rarely listened to, was now screaming that he had made a terrible mistake, that he had just married the real liar. Isabel's revenge was swift and ruthless. 3 days after the wedding, Hope was fired from the church, the place that had been her refuge. But the punishment didn't stop there. Isabel, using the power of her new last name, began a smear campaign throughout the city. With venomous phone calls, she painted Hope as an unstable, envious, and dangerous woman. Hope's name was informally blacklisted among the elite. Doors closed. Every job interview ended with an unexplained no. She, who had dared to challenge a queen, was condemned to professional exile, isolated and without resources, paying a very high price for her courage. Desperation reached its peak when her mother, Sonia's, health collapsed. The stress of the situation worsened her fragile heart condition, and the doctor gave the sentence: she needed an expensive, urgent surgery, or she would have only a few months to live. The cost was a fortune that Hope, now living off odd jobs, could never afford. In a final act of sacrifice, she did the unthinkable. She sold her long, beautiful hair to a wig factory. The money was a drop in the ocean, but the gesture was a landmark. In that moment, looking at her reflection with short hair and a face gaunt from suffering, the old Hope disappeared forever. The physical transformation, born of pain, became her disguise. Unrecognizable, she got a job at a huge impersonal construction company, Almeida Constructions. She was assigned to the executive floor, a world of luxury and power she now observed from the shadows like a ghost. No one there connected her to the crazy woman from the church who had become gossip in the city's wealthy circles. Anonymity was her new armor. She cleaned the offices, head down, heart on alert, not knowing that fate, in its irony, had placed her in the exact center of enemy territory, closer to the truth than she could have ever imagined. The micro-climax, the seed of the turnabout, came in her first week. While cleaning the CEO's office, her heart nearly stopped. The man behind the desk was Alexander, the groom, who didn't recognize her. While dusting his desk, her eyes found the wedding photo, and behind it, almost hidden, was another photo. In it, Isabel was embracing another man on a beach. With trembling hands, Hope turned the photograph over. On the back, a dedication: Isabel and Daniel. Daniel, the name she had heard in the sacristy. It was proof. The first piece of a puzzle she was now determined to assemble. With the photo hidden in her pocket, the invisible housekeeper had just become an investigator. At rock bottom, fate handed her the first weapon. Revenge, once an impossible dream, now has a chance. If you've ever been in a situation where one small piece of proof could change everything, share your story in the comments and subscribe to the channel to see how Hope will use this discovery. Hope's life became a dangerous double performance. By day, she was the efficient and invisible housekeeper who cleaned the traces of power and arrogance. By night, she was a detective, putting together the pieces of the puzzle that was Isabel's life. She observed the casual cruelty with which her boss treated the assistants, the way the light in Alexander's eyes grew dimmer each week. Using her invisibility as a superpower, she overheard conversations, found crumpled notes in the trash. One night, she followed Isabel to a hotel bar and from a distance managed to get a blurry photo of her with Daniel, the lover. She now had the definitive proof, the weapon she needed for the final battle. The opportunity to understand the full plan came on another night of espionage. Hidden Hope. overheard the conversation that would seal everyone's fate. Isabel was impatient, tired of waiting. The final plan was simple and diabolical: to create a fake family emergency, a crisis that would require Alexander to sign a massive fund transfer without time to read the details. "He trusts me now," Isabel said to her lover, her voice full of greed. "I just need the right scare to make him sign the papers." Hope's blood ran cold. They weren't just going to rob him, they were going to use a bond of trust as the weapon for the crime, a cruelty that made the theft even more vile. That night, Hope didn't sleep. The weight of that information was overwhelming. She looked at her sleeping mother, whose life depended on that job, on that silence. If she told Alexander and he didn't believe her, if Isabel managed to twist the situation, she would lose everything. But if she remained silent, a man who, despite everything, had given her a chance, would be completely destroyed. Dignity, her mother always said, was the only thing a poor person truly owned, and her dignity would not let her be an accomplice to that injustice. With trembling hands, she placed the two photographs in an envelope. She would risk everything for the truth. The next morning, before the sun rose, Hope arrived at the office. The silence of the 15th floor was heavy. She slid the anonymous envelope under the door of Alexander's office and disappeared, returning to her role as the invisible housekeeper. Hours later, the narrative followed Alexander. He arrived, found the envelope, opened it. First, the wedding photo with Isabel's happy face, and behind it, the photo of her with Daniel, the mocking smile, the note, and the last photo from the bar. A simple note said, "Open your eyes." Alexander's world collapsed. The doubt he had carried for over a year solidified into a granite certainty. The woman he had married was a fraud, and the housekeeper he had humiliated was a prophet. The revelation in Alexander's office didn't break him, it forged him into something new. The confused, heartbroken man gave way to a cold, determined strategist, driven now not by pain, but by a thirst for justice. He decided to play Isabel's game, but with his own rules. He hired a private investigator to gather irrefutable legal evidence of the affair and the financial conspiracy. At home, he became the perfect husband, supporting Isabel's ideas, discussing the future, calming her suspicions with a performance of love and trust. Isabel, blinded by greed and arrogance, believed her manipulation was working perfectly, not realizing that the hunter had become the hunted. Weeks later, with a complete dossier in hand, Alexander set the final trap. He called an emergency meeting in his office under the pretext of signing the papers for the emergency investment Isabel had proposed. She arrived radiant, dressed for victory, believing that this was the day she would finally get her hands on the family fortune. The room was full of lawyers and accountants, a setting that only reinforced her sense of triumph. She had no idea that she was not there for a signing, but for a sentencing, and that every person in that room was a witness to her imminent downfall. "Shall we sign and celebrate, my love?" Isabel said, her voice full of a false joy. Alexander smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Almost. First, I'd like to introduce a new partner in this venture." The door opened, and Isabel's lover, Daniel, entered, escorted by security guards, his face pale with dread. Through another door entered Hope, no longer in her uniform, but with the dignified posture of someone who had come to reclaim her honor. Isabel froze. The trap had closed. Alexander placed the dossier on the table. "It's all here, Isabel. The photos, the recordings, the plan to rob me, your betrayal." The silence in the room was the sound of her world crumbling. Faced with the evidence, Isabel's denial was useless, especially after Daniel, in a panic, confessed everything. There, in front of everyone, the charade she had maintained for over a year was dismantled. Alexander then turned to Hope in an act of public reparation. "And this is the woman you tried to destroy," he said. the woman who tried to warn me of the truth, and whom, in my shameful blindness, I refused to listen to. Hope, forgive me. His words were not just an apology, but the restoration of the dignity that had been stolen from her. The humiliated housekeeper was now the guest of honor at her tormentor's downfall. Isabel's ruin was as methodical as her plan. Alexander's lawyers presented her with divorce papers, a settlement that left her with nothing but what she had before the marriage. Stripped of her future of luxury and exposed as a con artist, she was escorted out of the building. In the hallway, her eyes met Hope's one last time. In Hope's gaze, there was no triumph, only a serene sadness. Justice had been done. The woman who thought she was the smartest of all had been defeated not by a rival of her stature, but by the silent persistence of the truth and the courage of the invisible woman she had tried to crush under her feet. After Isabel's fall, Alexander's first act was of reparation. He issued a public statement, not only clearing Hope of any suspicion, but also apologizing for his own flawed judgment. Next, he turned to the wound inside his own home, dedicating his time to rebuilding trust with his son, learning to be the present father he had never been. And then, with a humility he didn't know he possessed, he sought out Hope, no longer the housekeeper, but the woman who had shown him the truth. "I know I don't deserve it," he said, "but I'd like a chance to start over, not as boss and employee, but as friends who perhaps can heal each other's wounds." Their journey was slow and delicate. Hope, seeing the genuine change in Alexander, accepted. The new relationship was built on a foundation of honesty. He used his fortune to ensure her mother received the best possible medical care, not as a payment, but as an act of care. She, in turn, helped him reconnect with the simple joys of life, bringing laughter and warmth back into the cold mansion. In their long conversations, they shared their pains, their fears, and their dreams. Two souls who had been brutally betrayed found, in shared vulnerability, a safe haven and the rare miracle of a second chance to trust someone again. A year later, in the same church where the story began, a new ceremony took place. This time, there were no 300 guests, no high society pomp. It was a small, intimate wedding with only the closest family and friends. Hope's mother, now healthy, cried in the front row, but with happiness. This was not the celebration of a business deal, but of a true feeling, forged in pain and solidified by truth. When the priest invited them to say their vows, Alexander looked at Hope and said, "I choose honesty. I choose you." Their love was not a fairy tale, but something much stronger. It was real. The story that began with a lie whispered in a bathroom ended with a promise of truth before an altar. It was the journey of a man who learned that the greatest wealth is not the money one accumulates, but the character one builds, and of a woman who, even when the world tried to make her invisible and silent, used her voice to fight for dignity, not just her own, but for everyone's. For in the end, they discovered that love is not a contract to be exploited or a performance to be applauded, but a silent truth that, once spoken, has the power to rebuild any world that has been broken. A story that reminds us that the truth, no matter how long it takes, always finds a way. If you were moved by the journey of Hope and Alexander, subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from. We want to know, do you believe in second chances?